Hello shop fans, and today we're going to talk about that terrible grinding noise you get when you open your door on your Class A or on your fifth wheel, and you hear kind of a as the stairs go down. All good until right at the end of the cycle, maybe even at the beginning of the cycle, and then you get this grinding noise. You're like, oh man. We certainly had that happen coming back from Wyoming. And here right at the end of our trip, our stair motor went bad. And so, hey, I'm gonna show you something here. And that's the stair motor, and you guys know these are Kwikee steps. And you'll see, here's the motor. That's your basic setup. Now there's a couple of designs on Kwikee steps. And in fact, they kind of break them down between 1 and 2 step units and 3 and 4 step units. Track down the right motor, I'll tell you what that is. Sometimes the motor and the gear assembly come together, and 9/10 of the time I think you're gonna find you don't need that. So, all right, I want you to see this motor. I'm gonna hold it up. The part number shows right here on the front of it, and that is aiming down under your steps. It says it's 366043. That's from AM, and those guys, this motor you'll find out there with a completely different number on it, and that's because this is the assembly for the gearbox and the motor. You're not going to need the gearbox likely, because the gearbox uses a metal gear, and the driven gear, that's the drive gear on the gearbox, right? The driven gear right here, this one is actually nylon. All right, so when your motor fails, what's wrong? Well, here you can see I've got the top off the motor. Here's the drive gear. That's on a little spline or on a shaft. Here's the cover on the motor. I got that open. Then there was a circlip on the top. I took this apart, just took a pair of circlip pliers and pulled that off. And then that got us down to the driven gear. And this is the gear that has failed. So if you take a good look at that, I don't know if you can see, the teeth are literally ground off of it right here. All right, that gear is ruined. I don't think that you can actually buy the gear wheel, something to check on. But for me, I simply bought the motor. And so the replacement motor I've got over here in a box, and we're gonna look at that real quick. All right, there's my part. And it's from AM, so you'll recognize their logo, and the part number shows 676061. That's very different than the combined part for the gearbox assembly and the motor. All right, we're under the coach, and this is what you see when you see your stairs. And right here you're gonna see, first of all, this wire. That is a coat hanger. And what I did is I ran it through a little notch up here so it wouldn't slip off the top. And then I wired these steps up just by capturing this arm. And so that got them far enough out of the way. And this is how we came home after I pulled the motor out. Let's look around and see what all we see here. Right. First of all, you see the controller over here. There's a ground wire there. I'm going to guess that the controller is typically not a fail point, although it could be. Now there's your wiring harness coming out of the controller. This is a dead connector that we don't use, and it was never engaged. Okay, there's the motor wire. Pretty simple. It's a pinch plug right here, and you're able to unplug the motor. And then from there, I want you to look over here and look a little closer at the gearbox. So here is the gearbox assembly, and the arm right here is the arm that rotates that will allow your stairs to run. If you watch right up in this hole right here, you see this little white spot. There's a gear right there. So there's your gear right here, and there are the teeth. And so my first job is to assess those teeth. They look great. I don't have a problem. That arm seems to move nicely. You can see for the design, there's a straight arm on these step gearboxes, and then there's a curved arm. This is a more late model. That's the curved arm. It sits on this sort of gimbal or pivot. And this literally goes off and connects between, there's a dowel on the other side of the steps that will connect to raise this up. All right, so what we want to do is we want to put the motor right in here, right? And we can see gears, there's an alignment spindle, and so this is going to go pretty well. 1, 2, 3 bolts here. And so we really don't have much challenge. It's a straight bolt up, 3 bolts in. The alignment pin that is in the top of the gear wheel on the motor goes right up in this hole. That aligns the drive gear right here with the main gear wheel. And then inside the motor drive gear is that nylon gear that got eaten up. So we're in pretty good shape here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unwire this, my jury rig that kept the stairs out of the way. There we are. Here you can see the steps moving. There's where your pivot connects. Align here. All right. So you can see the steps are kind of in their halfway mode. And so what we need now is a pin that goes across here. And then the pin has a cotter pin on the side. And from there, then here's your actuator. By the way, I understand that the grease points you really want to focus on. If you take a look at this, this is a big dowel rod. This rod goes across. That goes straight to this actuator. And I'm told that, these are the points you want to grease. And so I'll probably clean these up and make sure that they're well greased. And then I'm going to grease this gear wheel and the pinion or the little gear assembly. But then I'll have to hook these pieces up here, right? And so that means there's a dowel rod that goes through and then a cotter pin that catches that dowel rod. So we'll do all of that. But first it's grease the motor and to get the motor bolted up. Alright, that's where I'm going to leave it for now. I need the parts for the cross pin. Alright, what else did we want to grease? Well, remember that there's 4 rods right here. Connections where these bushings or fittings go right through the metal frame. Alright, we're at reinstallation point, and you have 3 of these bolts right here, right? And so basically you take the gear and you align it with the gear arm up inside this housing. And then the next thing we did was we swung this pivot arm around right here and lined it up with this big bail that goes across here that raises and lowers the stairs. Now these stairs were in the locked out position, and so I just used my knee under the stairs. You might see back over here. I just took my knee and lifted those up, and that then lined this pin up, and so now your connector pin, that lined the connector pin up right here. And so I fed the connector pin through, and then I brought a new cotter pin to go through the step, the connector pin for the arm that opens the steps here and the arm that runs the motor. So I have a box of new cotter pins. I'll show those to you. I just went ahead and got a new one. Alright, so pins in. Looks like it'll stay put. That was a new one in case the old one was fatigued. Everything is pretty much arranged. You'll see, our motor's up. Our gear shaft through the middle of this motor is aligned with the arm gear inside here. I've lubricated all the swing points on the step here, here, here. Probably need to do a little on that one. Try to get that packed in as best we can. You can see over here we have another swing point. I've lubricated the ball bearing of the ball connector on the arm, so that looks good. I've lubricated the gear inside the motor and the gear on the top, or the gear inside the actuator. I guess they call that the transmission or the gearbox. And then the gear on the top of the motor, I've also lubricated the gear where they mesh. And then finally, this pivot point is lubricated. And I'm going to go ahead and do something for this outer bushing here and here. So it's just a blob of, I use this green grease from Lucas. I can see it better. It's a higher grade too, I think, but I'm just trying to cup into that. Thank you, that was somebody's vent running in their RV in storage. Thankfully it's over. All right, so all my points are lubricated. The only thing I have left now is to tighten these 3 bolts on the motor. I'll go get us that looks like a 10 millimeter. And once those are tightened up, then we plug in the power and I get out of the way of the step where I'm lying. Man, it's a thing of beauty. Working as